Today we're going to bust 5 different myths that might be holding too much thought space in your head. So let's get into it. Myth number 1. You need an expensive guitar to sound good. This myth exists because guitar marketing is really good at what it does. It makes you believe that all the tone comes from the price tag. But here's the truth. While expensive guitars do tend to sound and feel great, that doesn't mean they're the only way to sound good, or that you need one to get the most out of your playing. So why does this belief stick around? So a big part of it is what we see online right now. Many influencers and YouTubers are getting high-end gear for free or at steep discounts. Now that's not a bad thing. It's just how modern guitar marketing works. These creators are often demoing guitars on loan, buying with discounts from the manufacturer, or in some cases they get them totally for free. So of course they're going to play $3,000 to $5,000 guitars. They're not paying full price like we are. It's basically like today's version of wanting to play what the guitar heroes of old used to play. That can be really motivating, but it doesn't always match your budget or your actual needs. On top of that, I see a lot of older guys on forums who they got a 54 Strat for $100 in the early 70s, or they saved over decades to get their dream rig. That's awesome. But the reality is it can make, newer players feel bad or like they're behind when, their reality of how they came across this gear is so much different than what yours is. And that's not a bad thing for either of you. So are expensive guitars better? Well, most of the time, yes, they are. But these improvements aren't exponential. Like the jump from $300 to $1,200 is usually the biggest jump in terms of quality, materials, hardware, pickups, and consistency in the build. And then the next jump that I've seen is kind of the $1,200 to $2,000. And that gives you kind of some refinements especially if you're a mid-level player or you're, playing on stage. This is kind of the sweet spot, I would say, for players' guitars a lot of the time. And then everything from 2000 up, you're kind of paying for the brand name, maybe some extra craftsmanship or collector appeal. The tone and the playability don't always change dramatically. It's usually just kind of a 5 to 10%, I would say, improvement. And, if you've been playing a long time or you play a lot, you will notice that. I'm not going to lie. But is it such a huge difference that it's mandatory? Absolutely not. So the good news is you don't have to spend a lot of money or wait around until you get enough money to sound great. You can make a $300 Squire sound amazing if you know what you're doing. So some of my favorites in the budget range are like the Squire Classic Vibe and Vintage Modified. I use a bunch of those on recordings myself. And then in the mid-range, you have the Fender Mexico, and now it's Indonesia. You've got Epiphone, Ibanez, Schecter, the SE from PRS, and, the Jackson Indonesia models. Those are all really solid for people that are just starting out, or if you're, playing a lot in the beginning. It's a great value for the money. And then in the main pro tier, you have the US-built Fenders. You got the made in Japan Ibanez, the Gibson standard models. I'm not talking about the custom shop, crazy expensive ones, but PRS 22, 24 series. These are great if you've been playing and you're going to be playing for life and you want some solid long-term guitars to play with. That's what I would go with. But wherever you're at, don't feel shame about your gear. Focus on what you can control, and that is your playing. Play the best you can, and if the guitar is holding you back, then invest in a better one, or one that makes you feel more inspired to play. That's what I would spend money on. Something that's, just feels great in your hand, regardless of what the price is. And if you're on a budget, but you want to slightly improve it, the first thing you want to do is obviously get it set up great. Then maybe get better pickups, especially in the bridge. If you play a lot of rock, just getting a slightly better bridge pickup can make a huge difference. And then if the tuners don't stay in tune, those are the next thing I would upgrade. And then, if it can hold solid action and intonation, that'll make your $300 guitar feel like a $1,200 one easily. Just doing those few things. So just remember, the tone comes from you, not from your credit card. Myth number 2, vintage gear is always better. Well, unless you've inherited one, like your uncle handed one down to you for free, or you have loads of money to burn, there's almost no reason to chase vintage guitars. Sure, they've become collectibles, mostly baby boomers that want to relive their youth, but these guitars aren't museum pieces. They're meant to be played. So sure, a vintage guitar from the 60s or 70s or whatever might have a certain charm. They might be really cool to play. They might have a ton of vibe, but they can come with a lot of issues too. The components might be fragile. It might be super high maintenance, like the neck is warped, or you might have a constant fear of damaging it or making it worthless. Why the heck would you want that in your life? Just get something you can play every day without worrying or stressing out about. I personally would never play a vintage guitar live unless I had tons of insurance, was making tons of money on stage, and had a full crew, like a guitar tech watching over it all the time. New guitars are just so much more consistent, more durable, and usually a lot better suited for daily use. It's like, having a 1968 Mustang might be really cool to have, but would you want to drive that to work every day? A newer car might not have the same vibe, but it's going to be a whole lot more reliable, easier to maintain, gets better gas mileage. If you're recording in a studio, vintage guitars might be really inspiring. But at a bar gig with bad lighting and beer flying across the stage, hell no, it's not worth the stress. Myth number 3, thicker strings always sound better. A lot of people think thicker strings always means better tone, but it's just not true at all. Heavier strings are going to sound darker and fuller. That's going to be great for things like jazz or maybe some kinds of blues, but they're a lot harder to play and may not suit the style you're going for. Like, are you using distortion? Are you playing metal or hard rock or punk? Well, lighter strings are going to sound brighter and more articulate. So they're going to cut through the mix. They're going to sound more like rock and roll strings. So if you play a lot of bends, a lot of leads with bends and things like that, thicker strings are going to feel like grabbing a barbed wire fence. It's just not going to be fun, and why torture yourself? Rick Beato actually did a really great demo of thicker versus lighter strings on his channel. I highly recommend watching that video. It's really worth watching. You might find that you want to try 8s on your guitar after watching that video. I know a lot of people like to point towards Stevie Ray Vaughan and, how he used really heavy strings. Well, a couple of things there. First of all, he tuned down a half step. And second of all, when he was first starting a tour, he might only have 10s on his guitar. And then as he was going along, he would have his guitar tech, bump it up to 11s. And then by the end of the tour, he was playing the 12s that everybody talks about. That's because he's playing so much that, your fingers really build up a lot of strength when you're playing every night. Try picking up that guitar with 12s on it after you haven't played for 6 months. It's going to feel like grabbing steel cables. It's not going to be a lot of fun. Trust me on this. It really boils down to a very personal preference. I mean, Billy Gibbons of ZZ Top and Yngwie Malmsteen both use 8s. So don't let your ego or what you hear on the internet dictate what's going to work best for you. Don't be afraid to try 8s on your Les Paul or 12s on your Jazzmaster like some people like. See what it sounds like. See if it works for you. Don't listen to what anybody else says. And if you're down tuning to like a drop C or something like that, yes, please use heavier strings. I can't tell you how many times I've seen kids, with a Strat with 9s on it in drop C, and you can just see the strings flapping in the wind. All right, myth number 4. Playing fast makes you a better guitarist. Many people think shredding equals greatness. But the truth? Feel, phrasing, and timing are what people remember. People that are not guitarists, they're not evaluating your skill, are going to be listening to how great your playing feels. In a lot of polls, The solo from Comfortably Numb by David Gilmour and Pink Floyd is rated as one of the best guitar solos ever. Is that a shredder solo? It's not. It's slower, it's melodic, it's very emotional, it fits the song perfectly. And that's why it's considered one of the best ever. And honestly, once you build that technique, speed isn't really that hard. But if it's all you do all the time, it's going to start to sound really cheesy and corny. You know, you may or may not have seen the Corey Feldman video that's been floating around the internets. So if you want to see what just playing fast without really doing anything looks like, I suggest you look that up. It's pretty funny. No offense, Corey. Sometimes just a single well-placed note, it can be like a Zen master cutting through the blur and the noise. You know what really makes a great guitar solo is kind of like a really great amusement park ride. It's got ups, it's got downs, it's got space to breathe. Would a roller coaster really be fun if it was just a straight line downhill for 5 straight minutes where you're going super fast? I mean, what makes it fun is, you know, you're going up slowly and then down fast. And then you have a little break. And then here comes a curve. And then you have a little break. And then you slow way down. And you start ratcheting up that hill. And then boom, downhill. Think of guitar solos the same way. I mean, it should have dynamics. It should be, you know, twists and turns and ups and downs, spaces. Otherwise, it's just boring speed. And that's not what anybody really wants to hear, believe it or not. Okay, for our last myth of the day, tube amps are always better than digital amps. I'm here to tell you today, right now, that you do not need a $5,000 tube amp to be considered a real guitarist. Tube amps are great. I love them. But digital modelers like the Kemper, the Helix, Axe-Fx, etc., they've come so far. They have so many sounds in them. They have all the effects, everything you would ever need. And the bonus is they weigh almost nothing. So they're more versatile. They're easier to deal with. You can get more consistent tones live. Have you ever tried miking a tube amp every night? Well, it's never going to sound the same. The room dynamics are going to change. You know, some people like that, but I would rather what's coming into my ears sound exactly the same every time so that I can focus on the show, not on why does my guitar tone sound terrible tonight. So for me, I still like to use my tube amps at home or in the studio, you know, to record with. But for gigs, I mean, I don't miss lifting anywhere from 40 to 150 pounds of amp everywhere I go, in and out. You know, after you get done playing for 4 hours, you really want to, you know, put a 70-pound combo in the back of your car afterwards when you're exhausted. And let's be honest, most clubs, most venues nowadays, they won't let you turn up an amp past 2 anyway. I can't tell you how many times when I used to bring my Marshall half stack everywhere. I mean, I had to put a plexiglass shield in front of it. Sometimes I'd have to put a moving blanket on the shield because it was still too loud, even though I had it on 2 or 3. I mean, the sound guys will hate you if you bring a tube amp and want to crank it. So back in the old days, these amps needed to be loud because usually the guitar was not going through the PA. There was no sound reinforcement for the guitars. It was usually just the vocals. And so you had to have huge amounts of guitar stacks. You know, sometimes they would mic the drums, but in the early days, it was just vocals. They didn't even have monitors on stage. But now, most of the time we have silent stages, and I don't see that as a bad thing. I mean, do you value your hearing? Do you want to be doing this a long time? Then I would highly recommend not blasting a tube amp into your right ear like I did for 20 years. And honestly, a lot of what I hear nowadays about people saying, you know, you have to, there's nothing like a tube amp on stage and you have to use it. And, you know, I hear people saying, if I go to a show and see a rock band and they're not blasting tube amps on stage, then I just walk away. I mean, that's elitist. Let's be real. That's elitist and classist. Not everybody can afford a tube amp nowadays. I mean, it's, you know, I can get a $500 processor that sounds great. Or no, I have to spend at least $2,000 on a tube amp that I have to haul everywhere. Well, are these guys going to come and be your roadie? Are they going to lift it in for you? Are they going to help you tell the sound guy, hey, I need to turn this up to 10 because it doesn't sound good and if it's turned down? They're not going to be there to help you. You know, a lot of people that play in bands are usually anywhere from like 16 to 25 years old. You know, unless you are making big bucks already, you know, a tube amp rig is going to be like a huge chunk of your wages for the year. And nowadays you can get a fantastic full setup for under $1,000, including guitar and modeler rig, or even like a Katana amp or something like that. So don't let all these people, you know, win you over with their gatekeeping and their nostalgia, telling you what your rig should be. Get what is going to get you on stage right now the fastest. Doesn't matter if it's a $3,000 tube amp or a $300 modeler. As long as you can get it to sound good and to sound like you on stage, then you're doing it right. Don't listen to anybody else. And let's just all remember, music is supposed to be fun. Playing guitar is a lot of fun. So don't let all these myths and all this stuff you hear, all this gatekeeping, all these nostalgia snobs get into your head, all right? Make the most with what you have. Play what inspires you. Keep growing, keep going. And if this helped, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button. It's really going to help me out a lot. And if you have some guitar myths that you've heard that you think are just the worst, drop those in the comments. I would love to hear them. Hope you find a way to get yourself on stage and get it done. That's all that counts.